Welcome back. Day 11 of Hammerween, and we're going to be covering 1959's The Stranglers of Bombay. So, as you can see behind me, we have the Thuggee cult from the Temple of Doom, and that's because this film we're talking about very much inspires the depiction of that cult, including their leader himself. Let's get into it. But firstly, again, thank you for your continued well wishes as I make my recovery. But also, thank you to people like Trev and like Stuart who have watched every episode, commented on every episode. And yeah, thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated. And indeed to all of you who have done likewise. So, let's crack on, not get too schmaltzy. We don't like that kind of thing here. Too saccharine. So, 1959, Hammer are wanting to make something a bit historical, but obviously don't want to patronize and preach to an audience. That's not their business. So they decide something needs a horror twist. Something they would do a bit later on with Rasputin, for example. Yes, it's a historical, but it's our kind of historical. It's a horror version of a historical. So this one starts with the Thuggee, who we witness worshipping their goddess Kali, the goddess of destruction, who I don't think she'd be worshipping goddesses of destruction. Just sounds like it's a ticket to disaster to me, but regardless. We witness them inducting younglings into their sect, and we see them taking out revenge against those who have failed Kali, and it's not pretty. To their own who mess up and fail, they burn their tongues out and pull their eyes out, depicted in quite graphic detail for 1959, quite graphic detail for 2024, because I had fish finger sandwiches last night when I rewatched this, and I was a bit queasy. That might be the cold, I'm not sure. Anyway, so against this backdrop, our hero, of course, can't be Indian because this is a film from the 50s. So our hero is Captain Lewis, played by Guy Rolfe, who would go on to one of the most bizarre careers ever. All sorts of horror, from this to Sardonicus, the William Castle film, to what, six Puppet Master films as Toulon, just all sorts of different things. The Bride, the 1980s reimagining of The Bride of Frankenstein. So very varied, long and odd career. But Guy Rolfe here is our hero, who's a British officer who notices, because, it's hard not to. Thousands of people seem to be missing from the local vicinity. Thousands. He's been investigating it for a while before the film even starts. Takes his concerns to his superior that we need to turn this into an official investigation. There's a vague whiff commentary, of course, on colonialization that nothing's been done because, well, it's only Indians, come on. But he wants to treat this as a legit murder inquiry, and missing persons at least. He's overruled in terms of getting to investigate it himself, but the colonel does agree to bring in someone else. Turns out to be that character you get in every kind of military film, the useless but knows someone. He went to school with my lad, that kind of old chums network thing. Right? So he comes in, Captain Connaught Smith, played by Alan Cuthbertson, who made a career out of playing soldiers. Just every year in the 50s and 60s, he played soldiers. Every single year. No exaggeration. So there's a bit of rivalry between those two because he's a completely useless investigator and thinks that the way to get to the truth is with the stick, not the carrot. Whereas Captain Lewis, and of course this film was made after Britain has lost India, is a much more sympathetic character towards the indigenous people. He likes them, he treats them with respect and dignity. So again, there's no doubt a little bit of we'll make him nice to them because we know in real life we've lost the Empire. So, we have to be a bit nice in this film. But Captain Lewis has a manservant who has a missing brother. He allows him to go looking for his brother. Um, Again, so it's not too ahead of its time in terms of depiction. He still has Indian servants who he allows to go looking for their own brother as if it's what a favor I'm doing you. God forbid you should be allowed to look for your missing brother. Unfortunately, that brother is an inductee into the Thuggee cult. Captain Lewis does still continue to investigate under the table, as it were, including pretty much resigning his commission. It should be noted that the way Britain ruled India, to modern audiences watching this, if you don't know the history, it will seem bizarre. Britain treated it like a company. Indeed, it kind of owned it under the British India Tea Trade, whatever it was called. Can't remember the exact term. But it was run like a company with shareholders and whatnot. And that's the way it's presented here, where the army answer to businessmen. So there's quite an odd dynamic at play where it's not um, war decisions, it's not being handed down from the foreign uh, department by the foreign secretary. It's being handed down by stockholders worried about tea. You know, we're losing too much tea in these raids by the thuggee, or they don't know it's the thuggee, but whoever it may be. We're losing too many people in these missing persons cases, blah, 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 blah. In terms of plot, from then on, um, Captain Lewis continues his investigation, and the Thuggee themselves start to investigate him because his name has come up. Right, so they now have a kind of adversary who they know they need to take out of the way because he's on to them and he knows what he's doing. He's not an idiot like most of the British soldiers. And he's proven that he really wants justice. He can't be bought off. He is hell bent for leather to pursue these guys. From then on, I don't think I want to go too much further in terms of what happens. Suffice to say, there's a resolution that I don't think will surprise anybody, but it's an underseen hammer from 1959, so I don't think it's really my right to tell you much more beyond there in terms of the third act and who betrays who. I haven't even mentioned characters like the High Priest of the Thuggee. He's played by George Pastel, and he's the one who kind of organizes affairs, and he looks exactly like Molaram from Temple of Doom. So he kind of organizes things from the very religious point of view, but they also have an organizer um, who is the Patel, which is kind of more business type person in town, and he's working for the Thuggee as well. And the Thuggee have someone in the British Army themselves. I think they call him, unfortunately, a half caste, which, okay. But so the Thuggee have different levels of, um, don't know, priest, servant, um, but they have infiltrated the British Army to a certain extent, both at the executive level with Patel and with Lieutenant Silver in terms of the officer level. So they're able to infiltrate and find out what Captain Lewis is doing before he even really has a chance to do it. So there's a few things that happens in the third act that are quite shocking, including mass murders, people being put into mass graves and buried overnight, just thousands of people going missing in the blink of an eye. But I'm going to leave the revelations for you to discover should you not have seen it. In terms of review, nice and easy. This is great. This is great stuff. You do have to excuse certain aspects that have just dated very badly for a couple of reasons. One, they dated badly um, because it's 2024 and most films from 59 will have, but also especially post-colonial Britain attitudes have dated badly. So the very, you know, parental attitude, patronizing attitude about India is still very present here. So Captain Lewis is kind, is decent, is honourable, but he's also very much as a father figure to these poor Indians who don't really know anything and they need someone like him, a nice kind father figure. Instead of saying, India could just govern itself. God forbid. A few characters are very stock, as mentioned, the Connaught Smith character who's very much that type of character we do have in films like these, where he's just there to thwart our hero because he's too inexperienced an officer and too cocky and arrogant, blah, 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 blah. But there's a lot of quite unexpected things in this film. There's a mongoose in this film who you think is just there as a little bit of colour, maybe to say, okay, we know we're filming this in England, but if we have a mongoose here, it might look a bit more exotic. And they're nice and easy to control on set. The mongoose has a bloody payoff. There's a setup and there's a payoff. And something that the mongoose does stops the death cult from doing something in the third act. Because if nothing else, these guys are fundamentalists. So they take what happens with the mongoose as a sign and it helps Captain Lewis out. So there's wonderful payoffs. There's the servant of Captain Lewis has a brother who's joined the cult. They have a pair of necklaces which they had as children. That has set up and payoff as well. A bit more twee the way that pays off, but it's still there. There's still an attention to detail. So there is very much a set this up in Act One, pay it off in Act Three. Nice structure, a nice flow to the film. The performances are brilliant. Again, Guy Rolfe, odd career, one of the oddest you can imagine. I mean, going from this to Puppet Master 9, bizarre, right? But he's great. He's fantastic. He feels like an authentic British officer. He just oozes that old school British mentality. It just feels like he is Captain Lewis. Alan Cuthbertson's great. You truly believe that he's a bumbling oaf who feels he's above India. There's racism oozing out his pores. Just perfect casting. George Pastel was the high priest of the Thuggee, completely convincing. I love George Pastel as an actor. Played, of course, in quite a few Hammer films, but for me, he'll always be Krieg from Tomb of the Cybermen against Patrick Troughton. But in fact, Doctor Who connection also. Roger Delgado's got quite a prominent role here, the first Master, as one of the Thuggee. Everybody plays it extremely well. I'd argue the wife is a little underwritten and undercooked and underplayed, but the script almost knows that. The script almost says she's really here so that he's got someone to talk to rather than have to talk out loud. She doesn't really have a character at all. But everybody else has got agency, action, urgency, and conviction, most importantly. They're all acting out of a genuine belief in what they do, whether it's to rescue and get justice for the missing people of India, or whether it's to worship the goddess Kali and take over. They have genuine conviction. And what happens, again, sounds silly to say, but with that mongoose, proves that these aren't just bad guys out for a bad time. They have genuine belief structures and they stick to them, which is quite progressive. It'd be very easy to just have them be evil for the sake of it, but they do something which is, in effect, good and against their purpose because they think something's a sign from Kali, you'll just leave that there. So wonderful. Nobody's set up as a cartoon character in this. Very grown up version of how to tell the story. The story itself is also quite faithful to real life events, much more than you'd expect from Hammer making a film like this. It actually tones down a lot because the Thuggee were just so impossibly violent and sadistic. What it doesn't do, which again we can't expect in 1959 from a British company, is hold Britain to account for anything. If the Thuggee thrived, which they did underground, it's because Britain laid the groundwork for that. But hey, so maybe a few issues with direction. Because we're not filming in India, it's all very, clearly sets and whatnot, but it's filmed a bit flat. It's not one of Terence Fisher's best directorial efforts, but in terms of what it needs to do, which is be a kind of adventure historical horror, it's all three of those things. It's historical, it's very adventuring, and there's a lot of horrific elements from start to finish. They wisely open with the Thuggee to throw you in at the deep end. So yeah, I really recommend this one. I think this is top drawer stuff, actually. Top drawer stuff. Much better than Terror of the Tongs, for example, which will come out a few years later. But yeah, I think this is top drawer Hammer. So thank you once again for bearing with me. My voice is going a bit weaker today. Yesterday it was kind of very deep, but today it's just a bit more faint. Hopefully that's a good sign. I'm on the road to recovery now. Join me tomorrow as we continue our vampire weekends. And we're going to make a start on the Karnstein trilogy. So the vampire lovers will kick off tomorrow. So, folks, take care. Let me know what you think of these films. And again, thank you to all and sundry for watching this series with me. We're not getting the kind of numbers that I do with music videos. My Neil Young videos do in the thousands. These ones do in the hundreds. That's fine. This is the stuff that I care about too. So different things, different audiences. Not everything's just about how many numbers you can get. It's about having a good discussion, and just preserving my thoughts on what I love to talk about and what hopefully will help you discover some new things, or maybe discover, as some of you have said, some old favorites that you've not even thought about in years, which, what a gift. Thank you very much for that. See you tomorrow, folks, for The Vampire Lovers.